Thanks so much, in Memphis. And tonight, several members of the Congressional Black Caucus are going to be wearing black 1870 buttons. That's a reference to the first known instance of a police officer killing an unarmed free black person in the U.S. He was 26 years old, Henry Truman, in Philadelphia in March of 1870. The constable who shot him was found guilty of manslaughter. Joining me now is former Attorney General Eric Holder, now chairman of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. Thank you so much for being with us, General Holder. It's good to see you. You've been working on police issues for so long when you were Attorney General and since. Let me ask you about this. At Tyree's funeral, Vice President Harris called police reform non-negotiable. How does that become non-negotiable in this divided Congress? How does the president get anything like this done?
Well, I think what she was trying to say was this is something that has to be a priority. We have seen far too many instances of people of color being treated inappropriately by members of law enforcement. This is something where I think there's the need for legislation, but I think this is a more complicated question than that. I think the last gentleman who was being interviewed really hit something that I think is really important. Too many people get dehumanized in that process, that interaction that they have with people in law enforcement, and get treated in a way that somebody who is thought of as a human being, as an equal, would not have been treated. And so there are cultural things that we have to deal with in addition to the statutory mechanisms that I think we have to put in place.
And how do we deal with that? How do you change the minds and hearts of people?
Well, that's a question that we've been wrestling with, almost as long as we have been a republic. But it is, and it's a big question. It's a big thing that we have to do. But I think we have to dedicate ourselves to doing it. It's not only a question of what happens in law enforcement. I'm always struck by the fact that people are surprised that we have, negative racial interactions in law enforcement when we have, as a society, greater, substantial numbers of negative racial things that are still occurring. And so why wouldn't you expect to see it in law enforcement? So these are things that we have to work on. We have to face some hard truths. We need to ask ourselves some difficult questions, but we can get to that place. Certainly one of the things that we don't need to do is to try to turn our back on our history, both bad and good. We need to learn from that history.
And another enormous issue is voting rights. These are things that were not accomplished by President Biden in the first 2 years, as much as he did accomplish, mostly on the economics and health care. But the George Floyd bill and also, the John Lewis bill. And there doesn't seem to be any hope in this Congress with this House to getting that done.
Well, I think we have to still push for it, but I think we have to be realistic also. I would not expect to see this House, this dominated by Republicans, vote in favor of what really are just, fairness measures in connection with, our voting system. I think the Republican Party, or too many in the Republican Party, have made peace with the notion that they're going to be a minority party that has majority power. They're okay with getting fewer votes as long as they hold on to the power that they have.
Let me also ask you about democracy writ large. This is the first State of the Union since the January 6th hearings, and it will again have a fence for security reasons, understandably, around the Capitol, which has been built already. Where do we stand as a democracy after watching those hearings and people waiting for the accountability of the top people, the president and his immediate circle? Former president.
Yeah, I think our democracy took some serious hits around January 6th and the lead up to January the 6th, when there was that conspiracy to subvert the will of the people and overturn the result of the election. Our institutions held, but barely. And I think that our democracy is still at risk. We should not think that because we had a fairly good result in the last election that everything is fine. There are still people who are determined to, through gerrymandering, through voter suppression, through attacks on the electoral infrastructure in our nation, to try to come up with ways in which they can hold on to power to which they are not entitled, and to have results that are not consistent with the desires of the American people. It's why I focused on this issue of racial and partisan gerrymandering so much.
And talk to me about that focus and what you're trying to accomplish with your movement.
trying to make sure that the redistricting process is simply done in a fair way, that parties are not drawing lines in such a way that they can guarantee a result. When you have people who serve in these safe districts that they are not going to get defeated in a general election, their only concern is about a primary. And as a result, that pushes people further and further to the right in the Republican Party. And to be fair, pushes people further and further to the left in the Democratic Party, and makes compromise something that is seen as a sign of weakness and invites a primary challenger, which then means that government doesn't get things done. It breeds cynicism in the people of this country around the ability of government to solve problems, and has a negative impact overall on our democracies. That's why we've been fighting to make sure that the process is fair. Because here's the deal. If the process is fair, Democrats will do just fine. We'll do just fine.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, but the president probably won't address that as much as some people might hope for tonight.
I suspect and I hope that we'll hear something about the state of our democracy, the need for passage of something consistent with the John Lewis provisions in the bill that was considered, even if it is something that is only put before the American people without a realistic hope that it'll get through a Republican House of Representatives. The focus on protecting our democracy must remain.
Thank you so much for everything you're doing.
Thank you.